Hello and welcome to my channel NBSoundHopperUK, and the subject of this video will be another 10 albums from the 80s which I consider to be under the radar. In my previous Under the Radar video, a large amount of the focus went on artists who had recorded albums for Illuminated Records. This video will cast a wider net over the 80s, although one album on Illuminated Records is featured. Some of what I'll be talking about will be the sort of thing that would make rock purists throw their hands up in horror over because drum machines are used. Of course, if you've no such prejudices, there may be something here that you like but haven't been aware of previously. The albums are in chronological order rather than based on preference. First is Colossal Youth by Young Marble Giants from 1980. This album just about sneaks into scope for this video on account of it being released in February 1980. An apt word to describe it is minimal, in terms of both instrumentation and production. In fact, the only glaringly non-minimal thing about it is the number of tracks. There are 15 in all, and most are under 3 minutes long. These songs mostly consist of guitar-based vocals, keyboards, and very restrained use of drum machine, which isn't even used at all on some tracks. There's nothing flash or abrasive in the playing. It's quite laid back, although not completely lacking in bounce. Alison Stratton's vocals are unusual in that they are not forceful at all. It's as though she were just singing along with some of her favourite records. All of these things combine to imbue the album with a naive charm, making it a pleasant listen. Second is Music for Stowaways by the British Electric Foundation from 1981. When Ian Craig Marsh and Martin Ware left the Human League in 1981, they went on to form Heaven 17 and had some chart success. Before Heaven 17 was put together, though, they had a project called the British Electric Foundation and released a cassette entitled Music for Stowaways. Thanks to the good people at Cold Spring Records, it's now been released on vinyl and CD. I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that much of the music included on it was intended for the third album by the Human League. In the absence of a vocalist, the tracks are therefore all instrumental, although Groove Thang would later morph into We Don't Need This Fascist Groove Thang once Glenn Gregory had joined and the name Heaven 17 was adopted. Music for Stowaways covers a range of electronic moods, and on Uptown Apocalypse and Music to Kill Your Parents By, it leans towards more experimental territory a la Cabaret Voltaire. For fans of the first two Human League albums, this is an essential purchase. Third is Heavy Duty Breaks by various artists from 1984. Without doubt, this album is rather dated. Nevertheless, that doesn't detract from it being an interesting and early example of creating a mix which serves as a label sampler. The label in question was Illuminated Records, and on this album, ex-Killing Joke bassist Youth brings together an assortment of tracks from various artists signed to the label and links them using electro breaks. The album starts with an off-the-record sample of then United States President Ronald Reagan jokingly saying that the USA would begin bombing Russia in 5 minutes. And after that cheerful start, we get samples of tracks by Portion Control, 400 Blows, 23 Skidoo, Dormanu, Executive Slacks, and the Sex Gang Children, amongst others. Side 1 has a touch more intensity and focus than Side 2, but on the whole, I'd say that this album might well appeal to anybody that likes 80s electro music and sampling. Fourth is Atom Drum Bop by the Three Johns from 1984. Throw the Fool, Gang of Four, and T-Rex into a box, then shake it about for a bit, and the Three Johns is the not inconceivable result. Like Gang of Four, the Three Johns came from Leeds and were politically left of centre, which is not to say that the lyrics are all chest-beating rants against Thatcherism. The album gets off to a great start with Teenage Nightingales to Wax, its slow beginning a contrast to the energetic bash it soon becomes. Do Not Cross the Line, Three Junk, Fire Pits, Missing, and Son of Mud all keep things nicely up-tempo with angular guitar in plentiful supply, along with some Mark Bolan-esque warbling. The tempo drops a touch on No Place, Dr. Freedom, and the Devil's Music without bogging the album down in the least. Class War / Merry at Their Toil, the final track on the original album, is probably my least favourite. On the whole, though, this is an enjoyable album, and the imaginative use of a drum machine helps keep it interesting. Fifth is Undone by The Lucy Show from 1985. The Lucy Show were formed in 1983 by Mark Bandola and Rob Van der Ven, a pair of expat Canadians living in London. Undone, their debut album, owes a lot to early albums by The Cure, The Sound, and The Concert Angels, albeit with the advantage of the more superior production techniques available by the mid-80s. Hence, it's quite polished. It contains 10 melodic, nicely constructed, predominantly jangly guitar-led tracks with Bandola and Van der Ven sharing vocals. When all said and done, I find it difficult to discern much fault in the album. Therefore, it's not easy for me to pick any standout tracks because I like them all. Given the band's influences, the lyrics are unsurprisingly bittersweet a lot of the time. Despite a fair amount of critical success in both the UK and the USA, and the band seemingly moving in an upwards trajectory, their record label, A&M UK, inexplicably dropped them. Bizarre. Sixth is Nail by Scraping Foetus off the Wheel from 1985. Jim Thirlwell is an Australian musician that has produced music under various aliases, including Wise Blood and Steroid Maximus, but perhaps his most widely known is that of Foetus, or various names incorporating the name Foetus, such as You've Got Foetus on Your Breath, Foetus Interruptus, and on Nail, Scraping Foetus Off the Wheel. With a name like that, you might be tempted to think that Thirlwell was just out to shock for shock's sake. That's not the case at all. The music mixes classical, electro, rock, and industrial, and lyrics that are very articulate. Thirlwell's vocal delivery is at times gruff or theatrical, and that helps give the lyrics a sense of direction. All in all, there's a kind of controlled madness at play, which can be quite humorous as well. The tortured cry of agony at the end of The Throne of Agony is both harrowing and hilarious. Enter the Exterminator contains a section where part of Grieg's Hall of the Mountain King is manically played and punctuated with metallic clangs against the backdrop of sampled pneumatic drill. Mad and funny at the same time. Nail is an intriguing album, and whatever anyone may think about Thirlwell's music or approach, he gets 10 out of 10 for imagination from me. Seventh is Not Born Beautiful by Shockheaded Peters from 1985. This is not one of the greatest albums I've ever heard, but it does have an elusive quality, something I can't quite put my finger on, something that challenges the listener to work out how it all fits together, if at all. It's not that the individual tracks are a difficult listen, more a case of trying to understand the album's direction. Anyway, Shockheaded Peters was formed by Carl Blake, a former member of post-punk band The Lemon Kittens. Say No to Funk is a vigorous bass-heavy album opener. Not that this is indicative of what's to come. The next track, Ideal, is very sparse, as are Mon Repose and The Kissing of the Gods on side 2. Chalet d'Amour and Miserable Worm have a sludgy, lethargic feel. Parabola and Wheel in the Bait are more up-tempo guitar-centric tracks, so it's very much a mixed bag displaying the band's post-punk origins as well as something else closer to other English experimental bands like Psychic TV, Coil, or Current 93. Without ticking the boxes to be part of my Oddball album series, Not Born Beautiful occupies a strange space in the mid-1980s. Eighth is Trilogy by Anne Clark from 1986. Anne Clark, that's Clark without an E, specialises in spoken word over backing music provided by an assortment of people. Trilogy compiles her first 3 albums, The Sitting Room, Changing Places, plus the majority of third album, Joined Up Writing. Unlike punk poet John Cooper Clarke, that's Clark with an E, her writing is more incisive about human relationships and attitudes, more serious than humorous. Musically, Trilogy covers new wave, dark wave, cold wave, and synth pop. Most tracks from The Sitting Room are down-tempo, Short Story being the exception. And subjects touched upon include madness, loneliness, frustration, and political angst. Similar themes permeate the other two albums. Changing Places consists of two halves, an electronic half co-written by David Harrow and the mostly new wave guitar side co-written by Vinnie Riley of the Girotti column. Things become largely synth pop on joined up writing. To summarise, Trilogy is a good document of both Anne Clark's development as a poet as well as shifts in popular music styles in the early 1980s. Ninth is Dissension by Slab from 1987. Discogs categorises this album as industrial, noise, funk, and that's pretty accurate, although with the track Dr. Bombay there's a hint of free jazz as well. On Dissension, the guitar is mostly heavy and distorted. The bass is fuzzy and funky and just as distorted, and the drums pound away alongside drum machine in places. For further embellishment, trumpet and assorted sampled noises are added sporadically. Undriven Snow, Dolores, and Gutter Busting all grind away in dirty, sludgy fashion, and this style for me reaches a peak on Flirt, my favourite track. This is an album that illustrates how British underground music was breaking away from punk and post-punk, in spite of the clear influence of Killing Joke here. I first heard Slab on the short-lived BBC Two alternative culture programme Snub TV, where the promo video for the single People Pie was played. That single and its B-side are included on the CD version of Dissension, a sadly overlooked and original album. Finally, 10th, Drop by the Shamen from 1987. Yes, the same band that in the early 1990s would go on to have the hits Move Any Mountain and Ebenezer Good. So what puts this album under the radar is the fact that Drop, their debut album, is nothing like their later material and consequently doesn't seem to trouble the notice of many people. The one-word explanation for why that might be is psychedelia. In 1987, some of the punk and post-punk era attitudes towards 60s music still prevailed, despite those two genres having arguably become stale. One of the key influences on Drop is the 60s LA band Love, particularly the album Forever Changes. Velvet Box, Passing Away, and Four Letter Girl all have echoes of what Love had done before. However, it's not a completely derivative album, and there's quite a bit of guitar that's characteristic of its day. Happy Days and Through My Window are evidence of that. Because of their later success with electronica, it's probable that Drop may always remain beneath the radar, which seems a little unjust to me because the album has a lot going for it. There we are. When it comes to albums that are under the radar, I think of the 80s, where the prevalence of independent labels and an uncertainty on the part of major labels about who to sign and how to market them makes it a decade which is curious to look back on. As is now customary, I've included links to a track from each of the albums in the video description. Details of how to interact regarding this video are shown at the end, so if you made it this far, thanks for watching.